keeping you informed. Mark Brené on CFAX 1070.
5:08 on your drive home. The BC government yesterday announced some changes to the way ICBC doles out benefits. Once legislation is passed, if you're in a car crash, the most you'll be able to receive for pain and suffering is $5,500. Now, that figure used to be open-ended, but you'd have to share some of that dough with your lawyers. Now, to make up for that, you'll be able to get more in other categories of damages. Medical and recovery costs, for example, will double to $300,000. Payouts for wage loss support also will increase, as will payouts for death and funeral costs and homemaking benefits. All of this would be retroactive to January 1st. Now, a lot of people are applauding the Attorney General, David Eby, for at least trying to do something to bring down ICBC's huge debt. But our next guest says it's not enough. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation wants changes that actually would save BC drivers money. Our guest is BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, Kris Sims. Hi, Kris.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being there for us. Tell us why you think these changes do not go far enough.
Well, they don't go far enough, and I did want to make a quick point and applaud him for actually digging into this. It's about time that somebody took on the ICBC file, and we can see that they're working very hard on changing things. So that is a good thing.
Yeah, the Liberals, I think it seems to be pretty much clear. The Liberals opened the fridge, smelt the cottage cheese, and then just closed the fridge and ran out of the house, right?
That's right, and the cottage cheese is stinking up the house.
That's right.
So it's the poor Attorney General that has a mop right now. And so it's important to give credit where it's due. So it's important that they're making these changes, and that's a good thing. A lot of insurance analysts are saying that some of these changes were long overdue when it comes to the accident scene. But what we're most concerned about as taxpayers and as ratepayers is the rate we pay. And right now, the rate we pay is the highest in all of Canada. Our average rate is about $1,700 every year. Those are ICBC's own numbers, and they're the highest in the whole country. And the worst part about it is we've got no choice. We're locked into a government-controlled monopoly, and the announcement that he made doesn't do anything to reduce the rate that we're paying right now. While it could help things long into the future and might reduce their actual debt and maybe stave off just a shocking amount of 40% rate hikes, things that we've been threatened with, it doesn't reduce the fact that we've got the highest right now. So we need to reduce the highest rates that we have right now, and we think the key to that is changing ICBC into something like a co-op or a credit union for people who choose to use them, and then opening that new co-op up to competition. Because as we've all experienced, most of the time when you have competition, prices come down.
Okay, let's get into that in our second half. I want to just sort of dissect from a taxpayer's point of view what was announced yesterday. Then we'll get into your concerns about the fact that $1,700 on average is what a driver will pay for insurance to drive here in BC. I want to ask you who wins and who loses. I want to play a cut for you first, though. This is Jane Dyson, who was on with Al Farabee here on CFAX 1070 this morning. She's with the Disability Alliance of British Columbia, and she says medical benefits allowances will go up, and that's something that they've been looking for years. Apparently, these have not gone up in 27 years. Here is Jane Dyson.
So, for example, medical and rehab costs are the maximum is $150,000. So, for example, if you're in an accident and you are severely injured and you're at fault, that is the maximum amount of money that you will get for your lifetime. So when you have somebody that is, for example, paralyzed from the neck down and who needs a wheelchair every 5 or 6 years, that can cost over $30,000, obviously that is not enough. And so we have been trying for many, many years now to see an increase to that level. And yesterday, that was what was one of the things that was announced.
Jane Dyson of the Disability Alliance of BC. So that's good news.
Yes, and I was speaking with insurance analysts and experts yesterday about this, and apparently this is long overdue. And wow, more than 20 years, 27 years?
Yeah.
That's a long time to wait for an update. The latest I had heard was that most have been waiting about 16 years or so for an update. And so we'll leave that, as a ratepayer and a taxpayer organization, we do trust in most insurance experts and analysts when they say this part was long overdue. And the idea of unfortunately, just imagine a death benefit, that's costs going up, rehab is going up, all that sort of thing, a pain and suffering when it comes to getting your own household back in order after an accident. Apparently, BC was a big laggard there. And so this is an important announcement. And like I said, we wanted to give the government credit where it's due. And if that will eventually, with the pain and suffering restrictions on minor injuries, save $1 billion with a B, that can be a good thing. However, we do share some concerns in just the liberty of it. So say you're injured in an accident and you've been deemed to have a minor injury. Well, just because it might be white tissue or a muscle injury doesn't mean that it's severe. And just because you might, break the very tip of your pinky finger and that technically is breaking a bone doesn't mean that it's more severe than a severe whiplash. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't understand why they put these injuries in categories because they can be so broad and so different.
Exactly. And because we have to have some form of categorization based on payouts, if you're going to impose a cap, that's why they're categorizing it this way. Otherwise, they would have no framework to impose a cap. And so that's why you're hearing some people speaking out saying, hey, easy to say put a cap on injury payouts if you're not the one that's injured. If you are the one that's injured, you're going to have to be sitting up and paying a lot of attention here. And we have had some instances in other provinces where people have said that they haven't gotten enough money. And the idea of trying to trust a government tribunal is a bit tricky. Also, I am concerned if we're taking all of these big court cases, which are expensive, and we grant them that. Time is money in court. But if we take all these court cases when it comes to injuries and shunt them over to a newly made government tribunal, do they have the staff for that? Do they have the people power to be able to manage that huge flow that they're anticipating? And I'd question that.
Yeah, they've got 14 months to get the staff together. We had the chair of the Civil Resolution Tribunal, Shannon Salter, on this morning with Adam Sterling. I think that was one of the questions he asked, but they have 14 months to get this right. I want to correct something that I said, just so I didn't make any misleading statements about what Jane Dyson said. When I said 27 years, Kris, what I was meaning to say was the last hike for medical benefit allowances was 27 years ago. But you are correct. They haven't been looking for, no one's been looking for it for the last 15 or 16 years, but 27 years was the last hike.
Oh, I see. Wow, that's still a long time.
That's a long time.
And so we were speaking with insurance experts yesterday, and apparently, again, it's not our area of expertise, but apparently the way that they deal with accident situations in British Columbia, car crash situations, needed an update. And so, while it's a good thing to modernize the system, we're still extremely concerned because we're still stuck with the highest bill in the whole country.
I was going to ask you who the losers are in this, but I think it's clear. You could argue the lawyers are, because now most minor injury claims will have to go to this tribunal first. We're up against the clock. We've got more time after the news break. Our guest is Kris Sims, who is the BC director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.
It's Mark Brennan on CFAX 1070.
5:20 on your drive home. Yesterday, the BC government announced changes to ICBC payouts in an attempt to fix the Crown Corporation's serious financial problems. Most ICBC watchers call the changes a good first step to fixing the so-called dumpster fire. But do the changes go far enough? The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says more fundamental change is needed. Our guest is BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Kris Sims. Kris, for those of us just joining, what would you like to have seen announced yesterday? Then we'll get into the co-op.
Well, as Attorney General David Eby has said, this is a dumpster fire, and we'd like to see a pumper truck. Unfortunately, yesterday, all we got was a squirt gun that reaches far into the future. So while it might have structurally helped far into the future, it does not help the current situation with us all being stuck with the highest rates in all of Canada right now.
We've been doing it this way for 43 years, but you say ICBC should be set up as a co-op, similar to a credit union, and then it should be opened up to competition. Give us your business prospects of that happening, and what would happen if we were to do that?
Well, the reason why we want to do this is, as everybody knows, ICBC was created way back in the 1970s, and it was created in part because a lot of people were concerned about the fluctuating rates of insurance, and they wanted some form of stability. We'll also remind people that back in the 70s, it was also an era when governments owned things like telecom companies and coal mines, and so it was kind of the fad at the time. We think that times have changed. Most people are used to shopping around for everything that they need, and we think that insurance should be one of those things that you're allowed to shop for. However, we do understand that some British Columbians are more comfortable with a mutual collective form of insurance. We have a long cultural history of things like co-ops and credit unions in BC. In fact, a very interesting insurance co-op was started here in British Columbia by Fraser Valley farmers for fire insurance. Back in the 1910s, they weren't getting the fire insurance coverage that they wanted, so they formed a co-op, and it was so successful that it is now across the prairies and offered in Ontario. It's still going today. And so that's why we think that we don't need to tow ICBC to the scrapyard, so to speak. We can just give it an overhaul, change it into a co-op owned by BC drivers that choose it, and then next to that, open that up to competition so that if you don't want to go in for the collective insurance of ICBC, you can then have the freedom to shop around and see if you can get a lower rate. Because right now, everybody else in Canada is paying on average a lower rate than we are. The current monopoly system is not working, and we think that it's intuitive for most people to understand that competition usually brings lower prices. And so that's why we think changing ICBC rather than scrapping it and offering it alongside of competition is the best way forward. I think most people are more comfortable with that in BC.
We're speaking with Kris Sims of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Director of the BC Division. CFAX 1070 listeners, should ICBC be set up as a co-op? 250-386-1161, star 1070. You can text us at 107010 or email us at talk@cfax1070.com. Let's go to Tracy. Tracy, you're first on CFAX. Hello.
I'd like to see auto insurance be canceled out completely, and then everybody sue each other. But
why, are you a lawyer?
No. I'm tired of paying for other people's crashes.
Yeah, but what happens if you have an accident and you just don't happen to have $2 million for public liability and public damage in your couch? What happens because you don't have insurance?
Then you go to prison.
Well, so far I don't see any problems with this idea, Tracy.
Well, what I really wanted to say was making up the shortfall for ICBC. Sure, penalize the people when they get into crashes, but where's all the things that keep people from getting into crashes in the first place? All I keep hearing about is distracted driving. I'm a courier. 99% of people are speeding by me, going more than 20 over the speed limit. They're weaving back and forth from lane to lane. They're tailgating each other. Somebody will be going 110 in the 90 zone on the highway in the left lane, and somebody else wants to go 140 behind them and is tailgating them. Like, no. Take people's licenses away. There is no right to drive. It's a privilege. You sign your license. I'm going to abide by all the laws of the road. You don't abide by the laws of the road, you're breaking that contract you signed. You lose your right, your privilege to drive. Simple. That's it.
Appreciate the phone call, Tracy. Kris, do you think we could go on the honor system with no insurance?
Probably not. I understand the frustration. I can hear it in his voice. And as a courier, he must see a lot of driving. And while some purely libertarian arguments might fit for the idea of just going Wild West with no insurance, I don't think the average person is comfortable with that. So I don't think the argument fits necessarily for our current environment.
Ron, you're next on CFAX 1070. Hi, Ron.
Yes, hi. I have two questions. One is related to the fact that before we had ICBC, we had private insurance. And there was, at one time, back in 1965, when a drug addict totaled my car, there was no penalty for him at all. I had to pay everything, because he didn't have any coverage, etc. It was a true mess. There is a reason why the people voted for government insurance here. Now, secondly, according to the news broadcast earlier, $840 million plus annually has been devoted to legal fees and medical reports. Some doctors are charging $1,000 an hour to do medical reports that are extensive. That is 2 or 3 pages. I mean, is there not a way we could look at ambulance-chasing lawyers who are advertising on television, because it must be very profitable, and medical, doctors who are clearly gouging the system? Does your guest have any concern about these two groups and the fact that some of us, through experience, know how much better government insurance was?
Let's find out, Ron. Thanks. Kris, go ahead.
Well, with respect to government insurance, and with great respect to your caller, I will gently say that times have changed. That was back in the very early 70s that they had to bring in their view, government-controlled insurance. But frankly, it's 2018, if I can say that nicely, and other provinces have private insurance. So just because we're suggesting that we need competition, again, not scrapping ICBC, but getting it to compete with other companies for auto insurance, doesn't mean that we want to set the clock back to 1965. What we want to do is to allow for BC drivers to choose where they're going to be spending their money and how they get their auto insurance, like you do in many other provinces in Canada. For example, Nova Scotia has some of the lowest auto insurance costs in all of Canada, and they're fully private. They don't have a government-forced monopoly insurance there at all.
They don't have our population either. Is that a factor?
They don't, but hey, take a look at Alberta, right? They have lower auto insurance. Quebec has the lowest auto insurance rates in all of Canada, and they have a blended system where the public insurance covers injury to the body, to the person, and private insurance corporations cover damage to the car. So they've got really innovative solutions if we take a look across Canada, because frankly, right now, we're the worst in the whole country when it comes to cost. And so the system we've got right now isn't working. And so that's why we're saying, let's open this up for competition. But again, if you want to keep ICBC as a co-op, as mutual insurance, then change it to a co-op. And one of the best parts about making it owned by BC drivers outright that choose it, it would take politicians' hands out of the cookie jar. They couldn't use it as a Crown Corporation ATM and scoop cash out of it whenever they want to paper over a budget deficit in the future. And that's a major sticking point with a lot of British Columbians. They're ticked off at seeing ICBC's coffers raided. And if they owned it outright as a co-op when they choose to use it, then that would take politicians out of the mix too.
I can't possibly top that. Let's hold it on that one. Thanks, Kris. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Kris Sims, the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.